There's another issue that has surfaced regarding why some women are single, why they've not been able to find a husband when they've been praying for one, asking for one, and that is the issue of inner vows. Inner vows generally can be traced back to parents who have a bad marriage. When a child has grown up in the ambiance of a great deal of conflict and hostility between the parents, there is the strong possibility that the child's soul or spirit would have made an inner vow that could be, I will never marry, or I will never put myself at risk to any man, or I will never trust a man, or some variation of these. Any of these inner vows can be set in concrete early on. And even though a child's mind as a young adult is seeking marriage, is asking for marriage, is crying out to God for marriage, if the unresolved pain in their spirit from those inner vows is still there, that can take precedence. It is even possible for a child in the womb to make that kind of an inner vow that will affect him for the rest of his life. Elijah House Ministries has produced some excellent teaching entitled Heart of Stone and Inner Vows. I'm not going to repeat that teaching here. I would encourage you to go to Elijah House Ministries and order that material if you have any sense that there is the possibility of that kind of woundedness in your life. As you listen to their explanation as to what inner vows are, how they came about, your spirit will bear witness as to whether that is an issue for you. Now, God the Father understood that we were coming into a season where there would be the breakdown of marriages and a great deal of trauma on a national basis. And so, 30 some years ago, God sent John Sanford and Jack Winter as the early spokesman, the early prophets revealing the message of the Father heart of God. When they began speaking about these issues 30, 35 years ago, they were so far ahead of their time. The message was for a tiny niche group only. Today, it has been mainstreamed, and their third, fourth, and fifth generation disciples are expressing the message in a magnificent way. But a spirit wound and a soul wound isn't healed until you can risk again and trust again. And there's so many experiences that we have with God the Father that are designed to teach us to risk and to trust. God knows that our parents were imperfect. Even if your parents had a great marriage, they were imperfect. But many of you listening to this came from a broken marriage or a hostile marriage or a violent marriage or one where the verbal abuse was nearly constant. Many of you have seen anguish on the part of one parent or the other over the difficulties in the marriage. And so God has not only sent human beings to release a message of healing of these wounds and breaking of the inner vows, but he himself designs experiences to allow us to trust him, to risk on him. There's another word for risk and trust, and that is the more theological word of faith. And remember that God says, without faith it is impossible to please him. One of the areas that every single woman needs to wrestle with is the issue of trust. Many, many of the single women that I know are extremely competent. This is not a bad thing. But sometimes the competence is driven by the commitment to never be dependent on, never be at risk when dealing with men. The thing that moves a man's heart most deeply is to be trusted and respected. The thing that moves a woman's heart most deeply is to be loved. When a man sees a woman that is marvelous in every way, except for the fact that she does not indicate, does not demonstrate, does not have in her actions or in her spirit the ability to trust a man, that man most likely is not going to want to have her as his wife. Trust is central to the marriage. And therefore, God, who is preparing you for marriage, is going to exquisitely craft circumstances and situations to allow you to learn to trust Him even when people around you are untrustworthy. When you have that kind of faith, when you have learned to trust the Father even when He hurts you, then you are prepared for the next step. We see this in the death of Christ on the cross. The fourth of the 7 last words of Christ on the cross was, my God, why have you forsaken me? And yet the last of the things that Christ said was, into your hands I commend my spirit. Into the hands of the very person who had abandoned him an hour or two earlier. This was a magnificent statement that Christ died with a broken body, but with a whole spirit. He refused to allow the greatest trauma in human history to breach his trust of the Father. So look at your own life. Look at the untrustworthy people that surround you. And rather than seeing them as agents of the devil sent to do damage to you, I would encourage you to see them as people that have been handpicked by the Father and brought to you so that you can learn to trust Him as He controls them. I remember learning that lesson. I left, or at least the first time I took that course. When I left the ministry, I was suffering from a very severe case of sheep bite. And my social distance with people was right around 100 yards. I didn't want to have anything to do with people. The last thing I wanted to deal with was Christians, and Christians in community was the worst of all. My trust level was somewhere below minus 500. After some time of God ministering to me directly without other people being around me, God took the next step, which was to cause me to trust Him regarding other people. Through a story that's far too long to tell, God tricked me into doing what I swore I would never do again, which was to teach a Bible study. Not only was it a Bible study, it was a Bible study of strangers. I didn't know any of them, and many of them didn't know each other. It was a bizarre circumstance, as only God can mastermind. And when I arrived, to my extreme surprise, I began with my guard up, angry at God for having tricked me into this, but committed to following it through and then escaping at the end of the allotted number of weeks. But I discovered over the course of time that every single one of those people in the group had been dehorned and defanged before God brought them into the Bible study. And I don't have ongoing relationship with any of the people in that group. That was many years ago. But I learned to trust God in that experience, that He can deal with people who are potentially untrustworthy. That is a lesson that each girl who has been raised in a broken home needs to learn. And so God brings wounding type people around you in order for you to learn to trust Him, to risk based on His protecting you from people who normally would hurt you. And as you learn that lesson, as you break off the inner vows that said, I will never trust men, and by inference, I will never trust the God who made men and chose the Father in my life, as you learn those lessons, your spirit will become infinitely more appealing to the men that are looking at you. A man desperately wants to be trusted by his wife. And if the wife cannot give him trust, the marriage will never have intimacy.